I'm Carolyn Gent. I'm the Deputy Chair of SCWA Steering Group, and I also work with Susie at the Bethany Children's Trust, which is, as you know, one of the member organisations of the Coalition. So that just to give you an idea of who I am and the basis on which I'm speaking to you. So this session is to share with you our approach and the lessons that we've learned along the way and the results that we've had to date, in the hope that that'll encourage you that change is possible. You've already heard from Susie that it is, and I'm going to try and prove it to you now that it is possible to change, even with an issue that is as endemic as this one is. SCWA has been engaging with witchcraft accusations since 2012 as SCWA. And Coalition members have been involved with it for longer than that, through our various partner projects on the ground. As we've said, it is a global issue, and I think it's important to keep emphasising that. Although the expertise that we have on the Coalition is primarily in Africa, and because we take a bottom-up approach, that means we work through partners on the ground, through the Coalition members' partners on the ground, rather than coming in as an external organisation and attempting to impose our thinking on anyone else. We've been focused on sub-Saharan nations, as Susie said, DR Congo and Togo in particular, and in Nigeria, simply because that's where we have partners. But that does not in any way mean that that is the only places where this is happening. It happens all over the world, in fact, and it is important to keep that in mind. So our approach has been directly tested in various parts of Congo and in Togo, but we are confident through our wider network of contacts and collaborators that it would be just as applicable in other nations too. Particularly, we've had endorsements from people in Ghana, Tanzania, Malawi, and elsewhere, and including further afield in Papua New Guinea. We have some quite close connections in Papua New Guinea where this is an issue, partly with children, partly with adults in different parts of Papua New Guinea. We also believe it would work elsewhere too, although it might need specific contextualisation to make it as effective as possible. I also want to emphasise that the presence of diaspora communities means that it is an issue in the UK as well. We mustn't forget that this is happening here too. In the light of our experience and that of our partners, our focus has been on prevention. Some of our collaborator partners are also involved in rescuing children, but that's not what SCWA does. Our focus is on changing thinking with a view to preventing this from happening in the first place. We have also understood from the call from the ground that one of the things that is needed is resources to equip church leaders to respond appropriately to the reality that they face. They come to us and they say, but what do we do with the family that come to us with a child that they believe to be a witch? And they are scared that if they simply refuse to engage at all, that family will take the child elsewhere. That won't stop the family from believing the child is a witch, but it will mean that they take the child elsewhere where worse harm could be done. We've already mentioned that the church is particularly influential in the areas where we're working, and that's one of the reasons why we work through church. We believe that that is a fundamental aspect of what we do. So turning to the key lessons that we've learned, I'm going to look at the don'ts first. These are the things that we've learned, partly from what we've been told and partly when we've made mistakes, and we want you to learn from our mistakes too, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The first thing we learned was that we must not make assumptions. We must not make assumptions about what is happening, nor must we make assumptions about the reasons why it is happening in that particular context. Secondly, we must not be dismissive. These are realities that are faced by the people in the areas where we're working. And appearing to think that that isn't the case means that you shut down any conversation before it starts. If you appear to be superior or judgmental of the community in which you're working, they simply will not engage. And at that point, you have lost the battle. Do not go on the attack. We're aware of other organisations where that has happened. They've gone on the attack against people who are involved in these practices, and that has also had the effect of shutting down the conversation. To give you a little bit more of information on that, has been particularly hard for us to engage with church leaders in Nigeria because of previous organisations which have gone in and have been very aggressive in their treatment of the church there and of church leaders and indeed of communities there. So they see anybody who is trying to deal with this issue as an enemy, and they are not interested in engaging. So it can have lasting consequences. If you go on the attack, you will shut down the conversation, not just for yourselves, but for other organisations that are trying to engage. And finally, just telling people to stop. Anyone who's got a toddler knows that doesn't work. Just telling people to stop doesn't change anything at all. You actually need to walk people through their thinking in a respectful and attentive manner where you are listening to what they have to say as well. And in allowing people a safe space to explore their thinking, that's when change begins to happen. So the do's. The first thing that we learned is the importance of learning about the culture where you are seeking to engage. It is inappropriate to assume that all cultures are the same, even within the same nation. There will be differences, significant differences between different cultures within the same nation, let alone across nations. And so it's particularly unhelpful to lump a whole continent together and talk about African this and African that, or Asian this and Asian that. It doesn't work. You need to learn about the culture where you are seeking to engage. Secondly, acknowledging local realities. As we've talked about already, the fear, for example, of evil spirits and of the harm that can be done through the spirit world is very, very real in the cultures where we have been operating. And it affects everything. It affects absolutely everything. And if you don't acknowledge that it is real, you have also shut down the conversation before you start. Seek expert advice. Susie's already said that we have our L plates on, and we've understood from very early on that we need to have people who can advise us and teach us about the relevant issues relating to child witch accusations. So we work very closely with theologians. We work particularly with theologians who either are African or from African nations. We have some of our closest collaborators are theologians from Ghana, from Nigeria, and from the DR Congo. But also with anthropologists and with other academics as well, who can give us quite a considerable insight into these, so that we can understand these issues in a far deeper way. And of course, the biggest experts are the people on the ground anyway. So we work very much with our project partners, listening to what they have to tell us about their context. We can know more about certain aspects of it, but they are most certainly the experts on the way that it plays out in their context. Be relational. That's actually a really significant thing. I think it was brought up by one of the groups earlier this morning, the idea of relationship and the importance of relationship. But in order to be relational, that also encompasses ideas of mutual respect, of listening, of learning from one another, of spending time together, of becoming more familiar with the realities that each of us live with. Without that relationship, it is very difficult to earn the right to have the conversations in the first place. Researching and addressing roots. The root causes of accusations, there are some that appear to be common across different groups, but there are some that are very specific to particular contexts. And it's very important not to assume that the things that may be causing accusations in one context are the same in a new context. They may be very different drivers. And the only way to do that research is basically spending time on the ground, either directly or through partner organisations. So, for example, we have done extensive research in both DR Congo and in Togo into the particular drivers behind this and the beliefs surrounding this whole issue of witchcraft accusations and witchcraft beliefs. And then we look at that research. We did that primarily through focus groups, talking to local people with local facilitators so that there isn't a sort of a barrier caused by an external organisation being involved. So having those focus groups, talking through these issues, hearing what they say, recording what they say, and then analysing those results afterwards. Now, there are two levels on which that analysis happens. One is a very much broad brush approach. So we look at where are the key themes. It becomes very clear quite quickly from that focus group research if there are some common threads that we can then build on. And we do that first, and then we work with those broad brush approaches. But we're also keen to provide a research base to what we do, which we can make available to others. So you've already seen on the loop the research that was done in Kinshasa among the pastors there. That is a piece of academic research. As Susie said, that was driven primarily by Professor Robert Priest in America, who has extensive understanding and expertise in this area. And then the Togolese research, the Togolese focus group research, is currently being analysed at the University of Hertfordshire by Professor Owen Davis, who is actually not a Christian, but is profoundly interested in this issue and very, very sympathetic to our approach and everything that we're doing. So through that, we are creating a research body that we can offer out to anyone who is interested, but we can also make sure that what we're doing and the way that we respond on the ground is relevant and applicable in that context. Finally, it's really important to believe that change is possible. It is hard to convey to you how far this has travelled, even since 2012 when we started, and the doors that have been opened. We do believe this is an issue that is very much on the heart of God. We do believe that it angers and grieves him terribly that this is happening, and particularly that it is happening in the name of the church in many areas. And so because of that, it's not really surprising that he has been opening doors for us, and that we have seen a change in the way that this is perceived locally, nationally and internationally in the years that we've been working on it. We've developed our model, which has all these things beginning with R. It's relational, it's respectful, it's research-based, it looks at root causes so that we can identify and change thinking around those root causes. We've created a resource that we can place in the hands of church leaders. It's contextualized, and it works at grassroots level with churches and others in the context where we're working. And we believe it would work elsewhere. It might need a little bit of adapting for different contexts, but we believe it would work elsewhere. And we've seen results. That's what our model of change looks like. You have a copy of it in your folders, so don't worry too much about trying to remember what's on here. You've got a copy of it in your folder. But you can see that it's a model that starts by developing relationship with local church leaders. Now, those of you who have projects that are on the ground or teams that are on the ground already have a head start with that. But we, as we have said, we work through church. So if your organisation is a parachurch organisation, you may want to build on that to work through churches specifically in the communities where you're active. Those relationships take time, and they involve mutual respect, mutual listening and learning. From those relationships, we create the focus groups. The focus groups are then facilitated by the local church leaders or the other parachurch connections that we have on the ground. The focus groups find out what the thinking is around this issue in that context, and it's not intended at that point to have any intervention. It's simply asking the questions and noting the answers. That research is then analysed, the broad brushes are pulled out, and those inform an action forum. This stage 3, can be skipped, but it's better if it's not. We have held action forums in both Kinshasa and in Lomé in Togo. At those action forums, what they are is that we co-organise them with our local partners. We bring in theologians who can address the root causes of accusations in that area that have been identified through the focus groups. So all of the talks that are given at that forum are in fact targeted at the local root causes of the problem. The teaching is given by theologians, it's biblically underpinned, because the authority is the Bible. The authority is not what we think in the UK or anywhere else. It's what it says in the Bible. So we want this to be biblically underpinned, and that's the alignment we're trying to create, the alignment between biblical values and the values that are being manifest on the ground. Those action forums, we generally as SCWA take a back seat during the forum. We want them to be locally owned, essentially. And then those resources that are created for that forum in the form of the talks from the theologians are then made available to the participants, who are then able to go and use them in their own churches and communities. So they become teaching resources which those people can go out and use in their own churches. And we know that that's exactly what happens. So for example, the forum in Kinshasa finished on a Saturday, and we could hear it being preached as we walked around in Kinshasa on Sunday. So you hear there's such a thirst for this material, and there's a real desire. Once people have had their thinking realigned, in a sense, with the biblical teaching on how we should behave towards children, on what Jesus did on the cross, on what may be influencing the way that the children are behaving, all of those sorts of things, that has an absolutely immediate impact. After that, we draw together people for an interactive workshop. Again, that we have produced the resource which Susie referred to, the Heart of the Matter, which is actually, it works without training trainers. It's designed with a facilitator's guide so that it can be downloaded and used immediately by the people on the ground. It's very low tech, doesn't require anything fancy, just a room or even a tree, and bring together some people and talk together, discuss together, create a safe environment where it's okay to explore these ideas together. That interactive workshop is then cascaded out by the participants. So it's pitched at church leaders, the material is pitched at church leaders. To our considerable surprise, but perhaps we shouldn't have been surprised, it turns out that it works with community leaders, it works with people like Mr. Muntu, who's a development worker. We've had representatives from education bodies, from justice bodies, from Anglican seminaries, all sorts of people coming to these pilot trainings that we've done, and it appears to connect. You can't tell from the feedback who's who, put it that way. So it appears to connect equally within and outside the church in a context where the Bible is an accepted authority. You've seen that photo already. That's one of the focus groups in Togo. The Togolese research included people who were Christians, people who were Muslims, people who were animists, and they had, depending on where in Togo it was carried out. Because Togo is the size of Wales, the research in Togo was nationwide. So it's a very complete picture of in a sort of snapshot sense, of the prevailing beliefs at that time throughout Togo. This is Dr. Andy Allo, who is a theologian from DRC. He's also an expert in Bible translation. He speaks about 7 languages, and he is an expert on Bible translation and a professor both at Africa International University and at the University in Bunia in Congo. He is one of the people who has done the teaching at the forums that we've run, and some of his materials, as I said, are available through our website in terms of the teaching resource. This is one of the workshops that we ran. There's a very strong focus on dialogue and on participation. We're not lecturing people. That doesn't work. You've got to have a space where people can talk about how they feel, what they believe, what they've experienced, in order to allow people to kind of explore their thinking in the whole area of witchcraft accusations. That's the end of the training in Kasai in DRC. There you can see Mr. Muntu in blue shirt. Mixtures of men and women who take this out and then they cascade it after they've had the teaching. We do take seriously the need to evaluate whether what we do makes any difference. It is quite difficult to quantify impact when you're talking about thinking and beliefs. It's much easier when you're digging a well or something like that, but it's more difficult if you are trying to change thinking and quantify what people think. What we have seen from the feedback, we carried out 4 pilot studies of the heart of the matter in urban and in rural Congo and in Lomé in Togo. And we collected a lot of feedback from the participants in those pilot studies, both the facilitators and the participants. And we wanted to refine the material in the light of the feedback that we received. One of the things that struck us, even in its imperfect form, even in that draft form that went out as the pilot, there was an immediate impact on those who took part in it. And what was particularly striking was the nature of the response, which was strong and it was personal. There was a lot of repentance, a lot of people who stood up in those pilots and said, I've been doing this, I can't believe how wrong I was, and I need to repent. And it's been public and quite extraordinary the way that's happened. And that's included people with a lot to lose from that type of public declaration. Susie's already mentioned that those who are engaged in very elaborate deliverance rituals around this issue have a pretty lucrative income stream and status within their community. So to stand up in a public place and say, I cannot believe I've been doing this, I am so, so sorry, is very, very impactful. Beyond I'm sorry, we've had I need to change. And many of the things that have been written in the feedback have said, I didn't understand and now I do understand, and I need to change, even in the way I behave with my own family at home. So pastors who've seen this as needing a direct personal application to their own lives, never mind what's happening in their church, it's I need to go home and behave differently in my family, and then I need to take it into my church and into my community. And then a commitment to act. Very many of them have said, I need to get involved in stopping this happening. I need to change what's happening in my community, in my church. And they want to tell other people. There's a desire to engage others in the same journey, for want of a better word. Now, the impact studies that we've done are largely qualitative, not quantitative, because of the nature of the issue. It's very difficult to go into a community and say, how many previous cases have there been of killing or torturing of children because you believe they're witches, because people don't tell you that kind of information. So what we've had to work from is testimony and testimony of change, both that is personal and within that community. We got hugely valuable feedback from the participants. Bridget, who is with us here, was one of the people who ran the pilot in Lubumbashi along with a Congolese colleague. And the feedback was extraordinarily helpful for us. It's allowed us to refine the material so that we're confident that it works. And it's also been unbelievably encouraging, because we've just seen how God has taken this tool and he's using it. Responses from over 90% of the Goma participants and 95% of the Lubumbashi ones expressed that need for change, or reflected a positive understanding of the teaching, in the sense of, I didn't understand and now I do. Over 50% of the Togo pilot participants made a clear and specific commitment, a personal commitment, to positive action to protect and value children. And the last point was particularly important one to emphasise. Even when there is the belief remains that a child could be a witch, or that witchcraft is a real and significant issue in that area, even where that belief remains, there was not one person who took part in that pilot who didn't say, even if this child is a witch, the abuse is wrong. We must not treat them this way. And because our focus has been primarily on, let's stop this from happening, let's stop this abuse that's linked to this practice, that was extremely encouraging to see that even if you can't change the thinking in its entirety, you can absolutely stop the thinking that abuse is okay. That's an example, a quote from one of the Lubumbashi participants. She said, "I will respond to this challenge that has been thrown out to me by taking on my responsibilities for child protection and by engaging others so as to please God." So there was a definite local and immediate response to the pilots. We then refined the material, sent out the refined version, which was then distributed to all the participants for them to use. So the question was, does it make any difference in the long term? 1 year on, I was in Goma at the beginning of, or the end of August, the beginning of September, 1 year after the pilot training in that city. And I gathered together the people who had participated in the pilot. I think we had about 2/3 of the group that had been at the original pilot came to this meeting. And I started by going through the resource, imagining that I might have to remind them what was in it. It very quickly became absolutely obvious that they knew perfectly well what was in it, because they have been using it throughout the year since the pilot. There are 7 modules in the resource. The first one's about God's heart for children, and we place this teaching in a broader child protection context. So it's, what does God think about children? What did Jesus show us about the way we should behave towards children? The second module is about personal responsibility and accepting responsibility for our own choices, rather than seeking to blame someone else if something goes wrong. The third module is on normal child development and the impact of trauma on children. Many of which, as you've heard already, the things that are perceived to be symptoms or indicators of a child being a witch, those things are often normal behaviours that follow trauma. So things like regression to bedwetting, or withdrawal, or showing aggression towards others. They're all known responses to trauma. And many of these children live in a traumatic environment, and if they're not in a traumatic environment anyway, they certainly become in one if they get accused of being a witch. So it was very important to be able to show that these things are normal behaviours. Trauma can have these effects, and trauma is a normal response to an abnormal situation. It doesn't mean you're a witch. The fourth module is on spiritual powers and the hierarchy of spiritual powers, acknowledging that we know the Bible is so clear that Satan is at work in the world, and that he has come to destroy and to kill and to lie and to deceive, and that he does have agents that he works through in demonic form. We don't deny any of that. We acknowledge that fully. But the emphasis of that module is on the fact that Jesus conquered all of that on the cross, and that there is no need to fear, that we are able to live lives that are victorious. And that has proven to be a particularly key message in this context because of fear as a driver of accusations. The next module is about the role of pastors, and we've talked about, even if you believe a child is possessed in some way, how did Jesus respond to those situations? How should pastors be dealing with that type of scenario? And showing the gulf between the way that Jesus dealt with those situations and the way that they're dealt with in these very highly ritualized, very aggressive, terrifying, frankly terrifying ceremonies that often happen around this issue. The next one is about the role of the community and the fact that we all have a responsibility to act to protect the children within our communities. And the final module is about the legal and children's rights framework that this sits within as well. So we've been emphasising for 6 modules, we've been emphasising the biblical framework. 7th module brings in the United Nations Charter, local laws. It's ironic in some ways and rather tragic that in DR Congo, which is an absolute epicenter for this, DR Congo has a child protection law that explicitly outlaws child witch accusations with an enormous fine as a penalty, but it's never enforced, virtually never enforced. And most people don't know about it. They're just unaware of it because it is so rarely enforced. A year later, going through those modules to see what people remembered, I was just bowled over. They know absolutely what's in those modules. They know what's in individual activities within those modules because they've been using it for a full year. That's just an extract from the report that I wrote after my trip. The participants began to share wonderful stories, both of what they had done and of what had happened as a result. They spoke animatedly of sustained teaching of a group of prophets or prophetesses. We've already heard the role that they play in the material, with a total change in attitude from people who had once been major drivers of accusations. They talked about teaching their own congregations and changed thinking as a result within their churches. They talked about families, so they've done this at multiple levels. It's been church streams. So the whole of one guy has taught all of the Baptist pastors in Goma in this. Others have targeted the groups like the prophets. Some, particularly the women who have got ministries among families, have targeted families. And some have dealt with it within their own families or with their next door neighbour on an individual level. And it's worked at every one of those levels. So they've talked about families transformed and restored as participants patiently explained the teaching they'd received and discovered the real reasons for the problems that had led to the accusations. So whether that is that someone has lost a job or a business has failed or someone is sick or whatever else it might be. Children running to tell them that since the teaching had been passed on in the churches, their parents' behaviour towards them and treatment of them had completely changed and that their homes were now happy places to be. So there is no question in my own mind. This is 1 year on. This is one of the 4 places where we did the pilots. This is dramatic change through this approach. One of the guys that was at that session, this lovely man here, Pastor Moses, he says this: "Today has confirmed for me the urgency of the training we have received on the heart of the matter. Children accused of witchcraft must be well looked after by the pastor. And above all, the pastor must defend them publicly, love them, chat with them, eat with them." We've already heard of the beliefs around food. that can cause all kinds of problems. This sets an example to others that there is nothing to fear and that the children are not witches at all. This guy also was there, his name's Joseph, and he says about one particular incident. The head of the family died, and this was followed by 4 accidents to other members of the family. Bearing in mind this is in Goma, where there essentially are no traffic rules, and basically the roads are lethal. They're full of motorbike taxis, and if you've got some money, you can buy a driving licence. There were 4 accidents to other members of the family. The death of the head of the family and the accidents led the family to believe that their misfortune was being caused by witchcraft. The family looked for the source of this witchcraft, and they concluded that one of the children wanted to exterminate the whole family. The whole family was ready to burn the child because they had taken him to many prayer and deliverance rooms, and he had refused to admit that he was a witch. I involved a few others who helped me to teach the family of this child until they were able to recognise that what they were doing was wrong. We were able to create a new harmony with this family, and now peace reigns there. I'm going to hand over to Stephanie because that's the paper resources, that's the teaching resources that we've produced in terms of a workshop context. Stephanie, who is also on the steering group, has been working on some parallel approaches that involve audio and media. So she's going to tell you a little bit about those.
Thank you, Carolyn. I just wanted to set a bit of background from how I and my organisation had got involved with these audio resources. So initially we began working with these resources through Fever Radio. We fell into this issue. This was an issue we didn't know anything about. We were approached by a Congolese pastor running a church in the diaspora here, and he wanted to do a project with street children in Kinshasa. He felt that they were a really marginalised group that needed to have a voice. So we thought we were going to the Congo to train a group of street living children to have a voice on the issues that were important to them, which we did that. So we trained a number of youth journalists to be able to talk about a range of issues. But within our consultation, time and time again, they said, we want to talk about this issue of child witchcraft accusation. They categorically clear in every consultation group that we held, they wanted to get a message out to the wider community that they wanted to say, I am not a witch. They wanted to stand up and have a voice in this situation. So that's the perspective that we were approaching it from, particularly from the audio resources. And in everything we've done, we're saying, how do we give these children a voice in this issue that has affected their life immeasurably? Their view of the church, the view of how God loves them, the loss of being in a family, the loss of security and stability. How do we give them back their dignity and to raise this issue? As we started to consult with a number of agencies, we spoke from World Vision to UNICEF to leading organisations working with street living children. It really emphasised the need for communication and media. It seemed a missing element in trying to speak about this issue, so we felt that we could fill a gap. But also as we were having conversations about this issue, the sense that actually it was be careful. Don't touch this issue. You could be creating something and you don't know what you're stepping into. So there was also the fear for us, how do we deal with this issue? How do we give a voice to these children that's safe for them, that we can do this with a real integrity, but also not create further trouble? And, I think Evie's always been questioning me, what do you do when you really want to create a change, when you want to kind of rock the system? How do we step out and do that? We also wanted to think about forces like Nollywood. If we were going to produce something, we wanted something that had that power and that level of value, that would get people to watch, or listen to pay attention to this issue. One of the things that we really wanted to do, or are trying to do, is to create a space for conversation and dialogue. We wanted to show a different perspective and at least create that space for debate. So one of the things that we've sought to do is to create dialogue, a space for dialogue, a space for participation, but ultimately the voice of the street child. So we've done basically essentially two resources. One of the things as well in our conversations, that if we were trying to use the voice of the street living child, nobody would take notice of them. Who's going to listen to them? They're already forgotten by many of the others, or people don't want to touch them, people fear them. So we had to really think very carefully, how do we approach this and do it in a way that's safe for the child, but also brings a voice. So we've done it in different ways, and thank you so much to Stop the Child Witchcraft Accusations Steering Group, because I didn't know how to approach this issue. We were able to brainstorm, refer to other organisations in the Congo that we could also work with and broaden the perspective, because this has been a journey over, 2 years to bring this to fruition. So we have got a pilot radio drama series, and within this radio drama, these are stories that have come from the street living children themselves. It is their stories that we are telling, and they are acting in this drama. So we're doing it in a way that engages people on this issue in a different way, and this is done in a Nollywood style. These are literally about to be broadcast on a large Christian radio station in Kinshasa, which will be part of an hour-long show where we will have other interviews and also debate and a chance for people to have question and answer on this issue. So we're looking to see what kind of debate is being raised, what are people's questions, and that will guide us to how we're going to use the resource and take that further. So that is imminent, and that will also be resources made available on the SCWA website. We've also had already some interest to have these in other languages. Then we knew that we wanted to work with the churches, churches being such a critical force in this, the level of influence that they have in their congregations, they could have such impact in changing how people perceive and act on this issue. But also for many, certainly for the children's perspective, they're the ones who put them in this place. So how do we engage that? And again, how do we do it safely and where the children can be taken seriously? So using the Heart of the Matter Toolkit framework, we pulled out down to the core themes, and we built a resource where it's got church, so it's got pastor feedback, it's got other interviews from parents that have been affected by this issue, children that's been affected by this issue. It's also got a short drama sketch that people can interact with as well. So those each are 10-minute segments. They are not long, but enough to take them through, and that can be done in churches, small Bible study groups, which we're just about to pilot. Henri Pierre, our radio journalist who is with us, he has lived this journey. He's been with us in the Congo. He's been liaising with our partners, capturing the story. And that's really difficult, to capture and honour those stories and make sure that we maintain the voice of those children. And in all of the resources, the last voice remains with the children themselves. And that's what we've tried to do throughout. I haven't given you a sample because I know a few of you might speak Lingala, but I just thought you might be lost. But that stuff is available to you, so please find Henri Pierre or myself. We've created a very short film, which in a way just gives you an essence. We just wanted to give you a flavour of just some of the voices. Oh, you want to show the film now? If people are willing to see the film now, this is just a flavour. This was made by the same producer that did our radio drama. Again, it just dramatises. It's a docudrama because we wanted to give a different perspective of approaching this issue. So this is your premiere. So this is the first time it's being shown, so feedback gratefully received.
dit. La combo na yeso ko bima. Ko bima. Bima. Na combo na yeso ne. Zara wana, yo de mo ko ki mate.
No, Mama. Nana mando kiti.
Popo tani sito kana ngoya uti wapi? Kasi na mademo bazana kati na yo wana ndia ko bachepo betila katanda. Popo na uza musala te. Kuna tindoko ezana kati na yo.
Na kombo na yeso ko bima.
Fongola motema mwana ngai. Bato ngolo bizimo ezana kati na yo wana. Popo sito kana mapele ti batu musu.
No, makasi.
Oni lisusu. Oni. Mais pasteur on est bien. Il y a des pasteurs escrocs au sommet sera battu par mafuta, au sommet sabaron qui est pesa kadobiko.
Parce que délivrer moi no kindo kezana ngo.
Soti mo nazo suba na mbetu c'est razando. Yo pasteur escroc. Elle dit que le bâti qui est ceux qui mo nazo suba na mbetu ndazando.
Papa, asi abanaki déjà ko loba. Tanka yo yenda tiki.
Alinye kaka loba pona asepelisa bino botika kobeta ye. Oyebi te la fille ngone sora makasi. Tala yaka. Botika biloko na bino. Et yo pasteur so est-ce que vous allez vraiment pasteur à solo? Loba, vous allez vraiment pasteur à solo. On va faire pour ce bambon bateau après avoir pour délivrer ton cours ça ceux qui posent délivrer. Biloko na bino botika, nzamba lingi bongote. Nzamba lingi bongote. Nzamba za na posa bateau ba osambela na bo solo. Bateau ba roluki na bo solo. Tando vindi simona, tala.
Mai oyo etangolaka. Comment na mo boyete o ezali so eza mai kaka boyete.
Etangolaka na film.
Na koyi kolongola film mais mai amela mai. Bokende mama mai. Amela ka mo.
Ado nanda kuna mai, nanda kuna mai.
Quand on a été pronte, j'avais compris que non, je ne faisais pas de bonnes pratiques. La pratique est mal en côté. Et là, souvent, ceux qui baillent, au Kombona, na solo naye, tant on a koyo kaye, ou ya koloba, na kotum na bino, ou sala kandengene. Solo bino na bima kabou. Yela na biloko bima kana. Et elle n'arrive pas na zoyer au cochini. Même moi, on a 5 ans, même moi, on a 2 ans. On a que les jeunes, il y a 2 jours, 3 jours, même 4 jours au cochini. Si il n'y a pas de choses à cause des jeunes, avant de courir, il y a pas de mbunda. Parce que les gens qui ont comme tala. Ils ont forcé moi à me soigner de ma carte. Soit beaucoup de gens ce n'était pas bien.
Nazando kite po mama nanga akufa.
Nando kite po papa nga so musala te.
Nga tuna responsable ya situation mboka te.
Nando kipo kaka yo be nando. Panda wanga zando kipo kana ndo banga mututie. Akache na biso. Nando boya mutunya so ata mukolo ata mwamuke. Nando boya e. Panda lo banga na zando. Mama mkabanga mkolote tando yonga na ndo boya ba onyoso so nage bunda nage fingo unga na zando na ndo baba lo bangai na mona mke na vio lele ba mena ba ba kosa ba makamke bandoki ba pasteur misuse bazali ba pasteur wa mikuta kokose moya batu makambo kando ga pole ga mbongo misiba kosa nga mukero alia mama na ye ba pasteur musu ezali mona ba ina mwana episi bo kosimba te mwana wa takindo foko sala bo na kindo bango fo na pesi conseil ba mama na ba papa ko landa ba pasteur alukuta te ba kosa yo te ke mwana na zandoki
Bana mususu de lelo bakoma ba fazer bana mususu lelo bakoma ba délaissé bazana ba là bazana ba menze à cause de ça la auto sala qui c'est pas bien bana mususu lelo bakata ba classe mona ko ba temps qui ba disparité mona bazana kitoki yenda sele ko makamona musale biba yenda sele ko peut-être makamona commerce biba on para a commune abandonné mona ko na dégoût ya mwana surtout récupérer soit dans salam boy pour la nuit dans ce moment osala boye para kamba ti action de grâce ape sur pour ça mosala délivrance parce que ezalaki lokola bilanga na biso bilanga profite olia profite mo action de grâce mo adimbe koya wana boye profite mbeso oyeba te koloba non avenir ya mwana ngo ezobebisa